Welcome to the Thrive Today podcast. I'm Natalie Bourne, the media host for Thrive Today and the founder of Innovation Meets Leadership. Well, ladies, we are a platform for women who lead and believe. And today we are back with our founder, Colleen Rouse, to talk a little bit about criticism part 2.
I'm excited about this section particularly.
Me too, because you know what? I think most people in life receive a lot of criticism over the years, especially if you've ever worked in corporate America, like you're going to get that at least twice a year. But not a lot of people are taught the art, the science of actually having a constructive conversation around criticism or feedback. When they have a message to deliver, man, they feel as awkward as the person receiving it, right? So how do we actually begin to ensure that when we sit down with someone to give them criticism, that we're doing that in a really good and healthy way?
And healthy is the key word here because I think a lot of us, if you would ask most women in particular,
Mhm.
how comfortable are you with confrontation? They would say they're not.
Not.
And this would have been me. There's a difference between the peacemaker and the peacekeeper. The
Yes.
peacekeeper doesn't want to disrupt anything.
Yeah.
The peacemaker wants that to be the ultimate end.
Yeah.
But they're willing to go through the process to get to that point. And so it's not about keeping the peace, it's about getting to a place of peace. And so I think that anybody that says they love confrontation, they worry me because why would you love confrontation? But if you are like myself, I mean, I felt like I was actually in a positive position because I felt like I didn't know how to handle confrontation, how to really disperse criticism.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to do it well. And so it forced me to learn, to go outside my own thinking, my own lack of skills, and it forced me to learn. And I want to read a scripture. We don't often do this. We
Let's
do
do
believe
it.
that the word of God is the
Yes.
basis for everything we do.
Yeah.
But I found it reading Hebrews chapter 12, where he talks about God disciplining his children. And even in verse 6, he says, "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son."
Wow.
So let's talk about this from the aspect of I'm the one giving the criticism. I see the motive here.
Mm-hmm.
The motive of the father needs to be the one that we adopt.
Wow.
So it is for the person's good. And we do it from a place of love. Okay. Then read this whole chapter 12, but I want to jump down to verse 11. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't stop there. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace. We're talking about peace
Yeah.
for those who have been trained by it. So what I took from that is
Wow.
when you're talking about criticism, when you're talking about correcting someone on your team, even if it's a coworker,
Yeah.
what is it that we're looking for? The fruit is this peaceable fruit of righteousness. This is what we're after. So guess what? The onus is partially on me and partially on the other person.
It's good.
So therefore, I just had this image. If I'm sitting down to confront someone, I can sit confronting them, facing them, and I'm confronting them.
Mm-hmm.
Or positionally, I am beside them as if my arm is around them.
Yeah.
And we are confronting the issue.
Head to head or side by side.
Exactly.
Yeah. You want to be side by side.
So even just that mental image, that visual image has helped me. Okay, so I'm beside you. I want the best for you in this situation. So this is how I show up to that moment that I'm going to have to confront. And then that gives me, because I have to have courage to bring the information, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all know we have biases. I mean,
Yes.
when we talked about this from the standpoint of receiving correction, we know that people can have very strong opinions based on lack of information.
Yes.
And so they're going to operate. We can be guilty of the same. In other words, we can take something, misinterpret it, and now we're going to sit down and we're going to confront somebody, and we don't know that we don't have the whole picture.
That is so important. I feel like we need to pause there because in that correction, I think we have to get very curious first and ask the right questions. So I want to talk to you about this thing that happened last week. Can you give me a picture of what was going on when these things unfolded? And let them kind of talk through it. In that, you may think to yourself, oh, okay, there's some details I didn't have. There's some information I didn't know. And now from that place, we can have a more powerful conversation because I'm not just coming in, forcing that person to defend themselves. I'm actually coming in, asking questions, getting really curious. And then we can isolate the piece of feedback that I actually need to provide them.
And you know what? It's key to let them lead because there's a couple things that happen. You're going to be listening for their heart attitude. Are they even aware?
Yeah.
Because as they describe their version of the circumstances, first of all, let's back up and say there are things that you can do to make this person feel safe. That onus is upon us. Hey, I'm aware of this incident, and we really need to see, get to the bottom of this and get to a place of success regarding this. So I'm going to ask you, and I want you to feel free to be truthful and honest.
Yeah.
And so you're leading into that. So as they're talking, you're listening, their version of truth. You are hearing if they're defensive. You are hearing if their self-awareness. Are they accusational? Are they just defensive? You can tell how mature they are by their description of the events that happen.
Wow.
And so you're listening for that because it's key for us to know how far can we actually proceed with this person?
Yeah.
How teachable are they? And because the Bible tells us don't rebuke a fool, but
Yeah.
what's going to happen? They're going to rend you. They're going to
Yes.
leave your office and go
That's right.
spread whatever about you.
And that's why most people don't want to give the criticism and the feedback is because they're afraid of the person's reaction once they leave the room. So even your ability in receiving it to be trustworthy with how you wield that feedback once you've received it is the same. And when you give it and how to even know in the first place, is this person going to be able to receive what I'm providing?
And this is why it's good to have somebody else in the room if possible.
Yes.
Because then it's not just your word against theirs. And these days, I think that's a safety measure.
Yes.
So as we hear their version and to see based on the other facts that we have, how does this work? Because sometimes, one of the things that I think has saved me a million times is this is not the only meeting. We treat these situations as if this is the only time, the only meeting, we have to solve it now. And that's when we can get into trouble because what if they share something that is brand new evidence? Okay, if you're trying something in a court of law and you have one attorney that introduces some findings that they did not share, what happens right then? That proceeding stops.
Wow.
And so there's reasons why our legal system is set up that way. So what if they share something that's like, this is brand new information? You can say, okay, this is new to me. If it warrants further investigation, then that's fine. And maybe you stop at that point or you call the other person. Sometimes it's good to have that other person sitting in the office that you need to bring in if it's just a one-on-one situation. And to say, okay, I've heard both sides and now we need to talk together.
Yeah. That's really good. I think about how important empathy is in this process and how a lot of what you're trying to do, and especially with that scripture we just read, a lot of what you're trying to do is approach the situation from the heart, a heart of love, a heart of empathy, a heart of really trying to get to the bottom and understand it, not come in there and correct somebody for doing something wrong, but really highlight where can we help them with a blind spot maybe that they have or something they need to move through to get to their other side of their leadership. I remember, I don't know, probably 20 years ago, I got to hear Jack Welch speak in Chicago. It was one of the most powerful talks that I've heard. He was the former CEO of GE. And one of the things he said is, hey, if you have an employee that reports to you, you see a huge blind spot that they have and you never tell them about it and they go somewhere else and they get fired for that, that's not on them. That's on you.
That's on you.
As the leader, you should have helped them. You should have tried to expose that blind spot so they could have worked on it. And I realize that, if you're leading people, there's a onus on us as leaders to have hard conversations. We can do hard things. I mean, it's hard, but it's so worthwhile because if you do it with the right heart and the right attitude, and if the person is teachable, they will appreciate that hard, tough criticism, feedback, even if in the moment they're not so appreciative.
And that is absolutely key. And so sometimes this brings us to another piece that we need to consider in
Mhm.
confrontation, and that is timing.
Yeah.
And so you bring this person, you try to bring this person to a point
Mhm.
where they are receptive,
Yep.
right? And part of that entails you saying, look, you have to understand that I see such great capacity in you,
Yeah.
but I also have the ability to see some things where you are sabotaging your own success.
Yes.
So we can work together on this, but you have to be willing. And that kind of a conversation is that piece in the conversation is so important because then they can determine that you're safe
Mm,
to be vulnerable
that's
in
good.
front of. Here's the thing the Lord has said to me. Can I trust you with someone else's garbage?
Mm.
You know, really,
Yeah.
how am I going to respond to this? And the other thing that rings through, the question that rings through is what is the redemptive process? Because we can safely make the assumption that God is a redeemer. He has a redemptive process. Will they follow it? And I will tell you in the midst of conversations that I've had, and let's talk about a conversation where I had to let someone go. I've had a few of
Yeah.
those, and I had the list of things
Yeah.
that needed to be addressed. And I felt like the Lord said, you know what? You need to handle this carefully
Mhm.
because, again, it goes back to yes, we want to have the hard conversations, but then the wisdom of that passage about rebuking a fool rings
Mhm.
true in this
Yeah.
setting. And so, as I'm having this conversation with this young woman, it became glaringly apparent that she was operating from this place of entitlement.
Yeah.
And so she was equally frustrated with me because
Mhm.
I wasn't giving her the promotion that she felt she deserved. So I was not aware of that piece until we are having this
Yeah.
conversation. And at that point,
Yep.
the Lord said, put your list away
Mhm.
because she is not ready to hear it. She will be, and I will deal with her.
Yeah.
And in fact, the beautiful thing of this individual, we came to a place where we both agreed she needed to go off staff. And about 2 years later, she came to me and she admitted all of the things. And
Wow.
it was so wonderful. Now, granted, I know that some of you that are listening or watching are like, yeah, well, these are not the kind of people I'm dealing with. Nonetheless, it is still like, what is the main thing?
Yeah.
We don't want to do the dump truck,
Right.
right? Because if we're doing a dump truck, then that's on us because we have failed
Yes.
to address things before the snowball got huge, right?
That's right.
I'm using way too many metaphors here.
Makes sense though, because I think that, if we sit down to have a conversation and you haven't talked to them about any of their blind spots in 6 months, that's doing them a disservice. They're walking into that conversation thinking you guys are
Yep.
just gonna have a grand old time, and here you
Yes.
are with a dump truck of information for them that they just had no grid for. And so how are we building in feedback more often so that they're not shocked and surprised? And I feel like that's a miss on our part of as leaders. If people are shocked and surprised by our feedback, that means we haven't had enough smaller conversations so that when we get to this big conversation, they're like, yep, we talked about that. Yes, that sounds familiar. Yep, I'm still working on that. They should be nodding their head in agreement that we've talked about these things, that we're working on these things, not, oh my goodness, you thought that way about me for 6 months and never told me, or worse, right? 8 months, 9 months, however long it takes for you to get to that review period. That hurts.
And I get why this happens
Yeah.
because we are running at such a pace and we don't want to be the kind of people that seem to be petty.
That's right.
So how do we handle that?
Yeah.
It's actually a lot easier than you think. So something happens, let's say your assistant is making arrangements for you and fails to put something on your calendar or whatever. And so you make them aware, are you aware this happened and I was double booked because this wasn't on
Hmm.
my calendar? And then you ask the question because this is where you're putting the onus on them. Okay, what do you think we need to do to prevent this from happening in the future?
That's good.
You're moving to solution again.
Yeah.
And so the responsibility is that's not being petty, that's
Yeah.
being wise.
Yeah.
And so as you're capturing these little misses, you're preventing the bigger misses.
Yeah. That's really good. I talk about this in my book, but I had a story of a guy, we called him Sam to hide the identity, but brilliant guy, just one of the most brilliant people I've ever worked for, created beautiful work, but couldn't get out of bed on time to come to meetings. And the first time it happened, I had to sit back and ask myself a question. Was I clear? Was I clear of my expectation? Was I clear? And did I then follow up with him and put it in writing? And I had to say no. I wasn't clear and I didn't put it in writing. Now, you would think if your boss puts a meeting on your calendar, you would know to
One
come
would
to that.
think.
But let's just assume for a second that that's not assumed. So I spelled it out. Hey, this meeting happens every week. We're all waiting on you to lead it. This is a meeting you lead. You come to it on time. Over the next several weeks, he continued to not show up on time for these meetings. And everyone's staring at me like, where's this guy? And I'm like, I don't know. Felt pretty silly. So eventually that turned into a write-up, which eventually turned into the next time you're late, Sam, I love your work, love working with you, but I'm going to ask you to get a box and clean out your desk. Can you repeat back to me what you heard? I'm going to have to get a box. Yeah, because it's been too many times now. You've been written up several times. Our next step is you're gone. I hate that. I hate it, but this is where we're tracking towards. Unfortunately, we had an offsite, and about an hour and a half into the offsite, he shows up. We've already started. We're an hour and a half in, and I waited. I didn't do it then, but on Monday morning, pulled him to the office, and I said, "Hey, what did we discuss? We're here. It's time." And so, I'm always asking myself as a leader, am I clear? Have I been really, really clear about the expectations? Have I spelled it out? Have I reinforced it? And if the answer is emphatically yes, then it's no longer my problem. It's theirs. And so I feel like as leaders, we have to go through those paces because it's really important to make sure that on our side, we've communicated clearly. Oftentimes, it's an assumption or a want in our mind, or I thought or I would have expected this to happen. And then we're really frustrated when it doesn't happen.
Exactly. And I think things in writing are so important to that end because then it's not just relying on our own memory
Yeah.
because, yeah, we dreamed that we said things we didn't
Yep.
say.
Yep.
And so having things in writing, it's really important. And because it places a level of emphasis on it.
Hmm.
And so obviously, pick your battles, be selective about that. But there are some things that we're requiring of our team that are
Yes.
absolutely pivotal, crucial.
Yes.
Showing up to run a meeting, I mean, but if somebody can't get it,
Yeah.
then they need another seat on the bus or they need another bus.
That's right.
And we need to be okay with that. And when you have to have, if it comes to these types of conversations where we have to let someone go, I think one of the things that's really important for us to understand is the onus is not on us to convince them that we have the right to
Right.
fire them.
No.
Yeah, I know I'm not talking about state laws, Georgia's a fire at will,
Yeah.
but I'm saying that if what's going to happen oftentimes is they're going to try a negotiation
Hmm.
process. And if you feel going into that, there was one occasion where I went in to fire somebody and I ended up letting them stay a little bit longer, but guess what? We had to fire them in the end.
Yeah.
So I think that just from the standpoint that don't get entangled in this type of conversation where you feel like you have to prove to this person that they need to be let go,
Yeah.
you better have worked through all of the
Mhm.
preliminaries to come to that decision when you enter the room.
Yeah. And that's what's hard is, everything, life is choices, right? And so, unfortunately, we have to be clear enough that if you continue to make this type of choice, there will be an
The
unfortunate
consequences.
outcome. Yeah,
Yeah.
that none of us want. But life is choices. And so, all we can do is help people understand the choices that are available to them and understand the consequences of those choices. And so, I think this is such a great conversation because, you know, I think that us staying level headed, staying calm, staying curious, asking really good questions, and not feeling like we have to have it all solved in one meeting. I think that's really great freedom that says, hey, this is not going to be the only time we talk about this. I'd like to help you in this area. Let's talk about follow up. So we've had the conversation, some time has gone by. What should follow up look like when we've had a very direct conversation about some things that need to change?
That's a fantastic question. Okay, let's talk about how long it takes for a new habit.
Yeah.
It's at least 30, actually, it's 90 days.
Yeah.
Most experts would say change, if you're changing a habit, which is oftentimes what we're talking about, takes 90 days.
Wow.
And that's a probationary period, right? So I would say we're going to follow up in 90 days. If you have some things prior to that that you want to instances or some sort of reporting, things that you've done, then I feel free. We don't need to wait 90 days. We can have a meeting earlier. Now, there's a reason why I do that because I want to see how seriously they're taking it.
Yeah.
So if I give them the leeway of 90 days and 60 days, I get an email or saying, hey, I want to talk to you about this. That is going to raise my level of confidence. And guess what they've just given me? They've just put some coins back in the pocket,
Yes.
right? They have done something that now the conversation can switch a little bit because I can praise them
Yes.
for that taking the initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have reason to highlight
Yeah.
the positive.
That's
And
good.
so giving somebody that time frame and giving them that leeway to see what they do with it, I think it's very telling
Yeah.
and it creates that opportunity for them to have some success.
Yeah. I had a leader once tell me the fortune is in the follow up. That's true if you're in sales, and it's true if you're trying to keep your job.
Great
You
saying.
being the one to actually follow up and follow through on what you talked about, get that feedback, talk to other people, get their impression of how you can evolve and change, and then bring that back to your leader in your next meeting. Or better yet, you set the next meeting so that you can get clarity on what you guys talked about and to see if they feel like things are moving forward. There's something really powerful in this proactivity piece when you do get that feedback to be the one to circle back, ask better questions. And yeah, as a leader, this is something we need to get better at.
100%. And you've just empowered that individual by giving them the responsibility. They are now put back in charge of their own life.
Yeah.
And that is a beneficial thing to do.
Mm-hmm. So good. Any final thoughts on this one? This is a good one. I mean, this is a very powerful conversation for our listeners today.
Well, I think one of the key things that we just kind of landed on here was the idea of not allowing things to accumulate
Yeah.
and to create an environment of growth. So if we are going to be the type of leader who is going to confront about things, I think the balance of that is that we ask ourselves as a leader equally, what opportunities am
Yeah.
I giving that actually help them to grow in their skills, not just in their weaknesses? In the 1980s, I believe, the Chinese won the table tennis.
Yeah.
And they didn't focus on the weaknesses of their players. If one guy who had strength was his backhand, guess what? He played with that. So
Wow.
what I don't want is to have an environment or a culture where there's so much bent on improving my weaknesses. I think creating this culture of overall growth
Yeah.
in their strengths as well, because sometimes growing in our strength is what's needed to give us courage to face our weakness.
Wow. Well, it's interesting, and we can't get into it now, but I feel like we have another episode coming that really we need to talk about how to help people identify their strengths and operate in them. Because it goes back to this idea that the person may not be incompetent. They may be in the wrong seat on the bus. And I love the quote that says, if you asked a fish to climb a tree, they would always seem incompetent, right? So putting someone in the right place where they can actually double down on their skills and not focus on their weaknesses is powerful. So there's a difference between violating values of the organization or just not being able to be trusted to show up on a meeting on time, right? Versus, hey, you've asked me to do this skill, and this is actually not a strong suit of mine. I'm going to fail at it every time versus moving me to a seat where I can be really successful because I'm operating in my gifting. So I love this because this does lean into the difference between your skill sets versus just violating values of the organization. Big differences here.
Big difference.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Well, thank you for your time today. This was fun.
It was very enjoyable. Hopefully it's helping all of you girls out there. And hey, give us your feedback. Your questions, your comments are so valuable to us because the whole premise of this is to champion you, to coach you, to challenge you in a good way. So you help us do that better by your interactions with us and your comments. We take them to heart.
Yeah. And so, hey, if you haven't had a chance to check out the Thrive Today community, we want you to do that now. Head over to thrivetoday.com to learn more. Get into community and surround yourself with like-minded women who all want to move in the same direction, to hone and champion you and your skill sets and who God's called you to be as a leader in the year ahead. So, hey, ladies, lead with courage this year. Continue to do that, and we'll see you next time.